Hello everyone, this is Jack Duffley with Duffley Law, and I want to spend some time talking about LLCs today. Just a few pointers to watch out for because there are a lot of things that can go wrong with LLCs. An LLC is a limited liability company, and they're a great tool for investors and business owners because when used properly, they should provide some extra liability protection for the owners in that if someone sues the business, they can't technically come after the owners of that business unless the owners were personally involved in something. If it's just a business lawsuit, it shouldn't spread to the actual underlying owners of that business. It's contained within the business. That's the general appeal to LLCs. It's a separation of that liability. It's in the name after all. But there are a lot of things that can go wrong with LLCs, both in the setup and in managing them after that, because it's not as simple as just buying a service to set up your LLC or doing it yourself, sending in that initial fee and then calling it a day, because there are plenty of things you have to do after the fact. And I want to talk about some of those here, because let's say you have a rental property. I have plenty of clients who want to set up LLCs for their rental properties. It makes a lot of sense because, like I said, it should provide that extra layer of liability protection in the event that there's a problem with the property or a problem with the underlying business of renting out that property. That's the whole idea. But it's not as simple as just setting up that LLC, putting the property into it, and then calling it a day, never looking at it ever again, because there are plenty of steps to take after that. And one of those shouldn't be too much of a surprise, but that is maintaining your filing fees or paying those fees as they come up, because typically there's going to be some sort of annual fee. You're going to have a registered agent in many cases that is required by the state, so you're going to have to pay that registered agent fee perhaps. You're definitely going to have some sort of annual report or annual filing fee with the state in question, so you definitely want to make sure you're staying current on those. On top of that, you want to make sure you're staying current with any local or state taxes affecting your business or affecting LLCs specifically. Some states have specific taxes for LLCs, but generally at the federal level, you're not going to see extra taxes on LLCs unless you elect to tax them as a corporation, but that's kind of beyond the scope of this. But some states are going to have specific filings that businesses have to make each year, whether it's for an LLC or not, but one that comes to mind, I do a lot of work in Texas, and in Texas they have this franchise tax filing that all businesses have to make each year, and depending on the amount of income that the business reports, that will determine whether they have to pay extra taxes. So that's just one of the many possible things to keep in mind, and your LLC will have to file that because it is the LLC as its own entity. It is its own person. It is separate from you. Even though you might be actively involved in the business that the LLC is participating in, it technically is separate from you. And that brings me to another very important point, and that's to make sure you keep finances, bank accounts, and everything separate between yourself and the LLC. So I'll write banks here. I'm not very good at this mouse writing, but you got banks, finances, keeping separate books, making sure that you're treating this business like its own business, because that is what it is. And if you're just commingling funds, as they like to say, where you're just putting all your personal and business funds together into one account, that is not going to look very good if you run into any trouble with maybe the tax authorities, but also if you run into a lawsuit and you're trying to say, hey, I shouldn't be liable here because I have this LLC, I have this LLC protection, it's in the name limited liability, but if a judge sees that you're just plowing all of your personal funds and personal expenses through this company, it doesn't really look like a very legitimate LLC all of a sudden, and it kind of defeats the spirit of having the LLC laws and things in the first place. So you have to be very careful with that, and that's why step number one, pretty much, after you pay the filing fees and keep up with your taxes, is to make sure you just keep those finances separate, clean, and try to keep your records nice and clean as well. And another thing that can help to legitimize your LLC a bit more is an operating agreement. Now this is like the agreement between the owners of the actual LLC, and it's sort of like the underlying governance for the company. And in many states, this actually isn't required. So if you're just a solo person who owns this LLC, in many cases, you might think, I don't really need an operating agreement because it's just me. And that's technically true, at least in most states. But you can look at it this way. If a court comes across an LLC with an operating agreement versus one without, which one is going to look a bit more legitimate in the eyes of that court? So that's kind of where some of this stems from. But also, if you're planning on scaling this company or you want to bring in extra people in the future, maybe it makes sense to just get that operating agreement set out in the first place. You could always change it later, but it often makes sense to at least have some sort of operating agreement at the beginning. But again, every person's situation is different. It's not always necessary necessary. Another thing to watch out for is insurance requirements, because some states have specific minimum insurance requirements for businesses, whether they're LLCs or not, depending on the type of business it is, the field or industry that it's in, that can determine various insurance requirements. Some industries might not have any, but if you have business insurance for your business, it looks quite a bit more legitimate than if you didn't have any insurance and you're just using this shell company that doesn't insure its own operations, that doesn't have an operating agreement, that doesn't have its own bank account, that doesn't pay its taxes, that doesn't make its filings. You see what we're getting at here. There's a lot of little things that can contribute to an overall much stronger picture for this LLC. Some of these are just absolute no questions. You got to do them. You got to pay your taxes. You got to make your filing fees. But you definitely want to make sure that you're doing as much as you can to legitimize this business, keeping it and treating it like a separate business, because that's ultimately what it is. But anyways, these are just a few things to look out for with LLCs. They are a very useful legal tool in many cases. They aren't always the best idea depending on what sort of business you're trying to run. So you definitely want to talk with an attorney if you're trying to set up an LLC or if you need help with managing one. But really the bottom line is you just want to make sure you're treating your LLC like its own business and following all the rules that come with that. If you found this video helpful, please let me know. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next one.